Our subject this morning, we don't need this microphone, do we? So I put this little acorn on. They say that great oaks from little acorns grow. We'll find out. We're going to talk about the furnace of creation this morning, and it is quite related with the days of creation. In other words, understanding of the days of creation will help us to understand why there is a furnace of creation, what its purpose is, and how we can use it through understanding how it works. Now, we all know that the days of the week are 7 in number. And we all know from Genesis, from the beginning, how that God, in the very beginning, established the 7 days of creation. The first day we read what he did, and so on. And then we come to the 7th day, and it states that the 7th day God rested. And we have called this the Sabbath. God has called it the Sabbath. Now, we're not concerned ourselves with the Sabbath from an outer standpoint, but from an inner standpoint. The inner standpoint of the Sabbath, or the day of rest, as the culmination of the 6 days of creation. And when I tell you, truly, that creation is not yet finished, that the outer creation is finished, but the inner creation of immortality is not finished insofar as we are concerned, I hope that you will understand what I'm talking about. Because the design of God was to create in his own image and convey the gift of freedom to man to choose, so that man would not be a robot, because God is not a robot. But who is God? I'm afraid that most of us think of God in a different way. We do not understand the nature of God as spirit. God is the power that has placed inherent in the seed the outcome of that seed, whether it is to be an oak tree, a human being, a chicken, or whatever it is to be. God has placed in that seed to bear after its kind. And the same thing is true of the Christ. The Christ had within him, from the moment of creation, the seed of divine perfection, which later, in Christ Jesus, made him come out and say, I and my Father are one. He recognized this oneness with God because it was latent within the seed that was placed within him, the Christ seed. Now, unfortunately, man has not understood the duality of the creation, which is brought forth in the phrase, the first Adam is of the earth earthy, and the second Adam is the Lord from heaven, which is another name for the Christ consciousness, or the manifestation of the Christ consciousness. Stop and think for a moment. The first Adam is of the earth earthy. This means that this is a material creation. That we are in time and we are in space. The Lord from heaven is able to clean escape from time and space and move as freely backward as he does forward. Therefore, by the process of backward movement, it is possible for us, in becoming one with God, to become our own creator. When you first think of this, of course, it is a stupendous statement. But when you really understand that that is the divine intention, that this God which is spirit put all within the seed, so that the seed would outpicture the plan. But now, in dealing with man, we need consent. We must have consent of the governed. In other words, we have to consent to what takes place in the world. And the problems that we have in the world today are, of course, related to misunderstanding primarily and ignorance. If we understood the purposes of God thoroughly, we would see that God intended for us to become a part of the Godhead. Well, obviously, when you look at people today, embodied humanity, and you look at some of them and you say, they are the Godhead? Well, then if so, I must be a monkey and a descendant of a monkey. And you hear all these evolutionary concepts because people don't understand that the divine plan is being worked out and that the furnace of creation is helping to work it out. We all know, or should know, about the atomic structure. We should realize that matter that seems so solid to our eyes and even to the examination of our fingers and our senses is actually made up of whirling electrons, and even below that in structure. Because as we start out, we find that the cell is the building block of matter, that below the cell we have the molecules and the molecular structure, and below the molecular structure we have the atomic structure and the subatomic particles. But when we come down to the depth of the smallest particle that our electron microscopes can behold, we get into waveforms and mind stuff, as it is called by our scientists. And they recognize that the basis of matter is the electrical nature of God or spirit. And so it is easy to understand, with this thought in mind, how mind can affect our bodies and either make them and keep them well or make them and keep them sick, because thoughts are things and they superimpose over the divine wavelengths and they result in our losing our God control of our physical bodies through the body elemental and through our thoughts. We are intended to multiply and replenish the earth and to take dominion over it. And this is also a creative process. And were it to be halted somewhere along the line, as some have suggested, in the name of purity, as though the birth process were of itself corrupt, they have suggested that we should halt it. Well, all of you know, and only common sense will tell you, that if all of us halted the birth process, that 100 years from now there would be practically no people upon the earth. And therefore the evolutions in the creative furnace could not continue. We would have a vacant planet whirling around in space with no embodiment, no people on it. And so it is a very reasonable thing that people provide bodies to house the souls. And there's nothing wrong about that. What is wrong about it is people's concepts of it. Thinking makes it dirty and filthy. But the process, as it was ordained by nature and nature's God, is not filthy at all. It's merely a programming of the divine seed. And the seed itself is beautiful because it is a Christ seed. People should understand that, because then they will be able to escape from the satanic overlay which the powers of darkness put over everything, whether it's benign or not, everything they can, in order to create illusions. And these illusions then, becoming accepted by people, cause people to think that everything is either dirty, black, or white. And so we have concepts like, we say, going to church. Right away we say going to church, we have an image of a steeple and people sitting there singing songs. So we say that's good. Well, maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. Sometimes people go to church and do things in church that are diabolical. So it isn't just the going to church, it's the internal concepts of our temple, what we think and what we feel. Thinking makes it so. And if we think purity, and live purity, we will be able to understand that the plans of God are dual. We have to have a physical creation in Adam in order to spiritualize man and raise man to that level where he can become one with Christ. And the schoolroom is here in this furnace of creation. And why is it a furnace? Because, quite frankly, we have reacted to it to some degree. We have, in many cases, been quite bitter in opposing the process. There are things about life that we do not like, and quite often we blame the deity in a subconscious way. Think of it, in a subconscious way. In other words, hardly any of us would dare to come out and say to God, shake our fist in his face and say we don't like you. But we actually do it in another subtle way. I don't mean all of us, but some people do, and quite a few. They rebel the moment something goes the way they think it shouldn't go without recognizing the law of compensation. Every one of you know that there's been killing going on in this world from the time of Cain, and God only knows, probably this existed even before that on other planets, who knows. But there have been killing of man by man, what we term inhumanity to man. And with all the killing that's been going on and all the battles that have been fought, surely man should understand that somebody has done it. And the people who are engaged in doing it, quite naturally, are the ones that are going to be recipients of this. In other words, the law requires that it return. In other words, what we do, we must pay for afterward. I have had this experience. I've done wrong, not in this life that I've murdered anybody, heavens no. But the point I want to make is I'm sure that in some battle, somewhere in the past, in some lifetime, I must have done something of that nature. At least I think it's possible that I did. And so I know that I have also borne the brunt of that. You know, Jesus said it, and he said it very well. He said, he that taketh the sword shall perish with it. And so people today should not always resent the return of karma that comes back to various people. Each man shall bear his own burden, St. Paul said. Well, if we all bear our own burden, it should be perfectly reasonable that we get our own. The only thing I'm upset a little bit about would be the idea if I had to get somebody else's. I just wouldn't exactly like that. And I don't think you would either. If we bear our own, whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable, at least it is our own. We made our bed and we have to lie in it. But the mercy of God has prepared for us a means of escape from karma even today in a reasonable way. In other words, through the use of the violet transmuting flame, we are able to transmute those subliminal influences that are basic seeds of darkness within ourselves. Our dark seeds, the seeds that we have created, doubt and mistrust and fear and everything that's the opposite of love, it lies dormant in our subconscious mind, waiting the play of some dark ray to energize it. And as soon as it is energized, then it begins to sprout and take root. And the first thing you know, we have a full-blown manifestation of darkness in some way functioning in our world. Obviously, it must be uprooted. It cannot remain. Because if it remains, it will act as a barrier to our ascending in consciousness. You can't serve two masters. You have to serve the one master. And so it's very simple, really, when you stop and think about it. Now, what I said a moment ago about you becoming God is not a desecration. Because Moses in the Old Testament said to the children of Israel, and there were times that they were anything but godly, he said to them, ye are gods. Now you can take that two ways. You can take it as meaning that you are possessed by God, or you can take it that you are God in essence. And I think both are correct within their context. But I know that many people act a far cry from what God is expected to be. Hence, we have to recognize that when he called them gods, and Jesus quoted the scripture later at a time when he called himself the Son of God. He said, I am the Son of God. And they took great exception. The Sanhedrin opposed him bitterly on this. What right does this man have to blaspheme? Why does this man claim that he's the Son of God? How dare he assert such a thing? It's terrible. And he ought to be killed for this. That was the basic idea. Just because he said, I'm the Son of God. So he answered them. And he was quite a contender in the law. You'll have to recognize that he was a very learned man, because at the age of 12 in the temple, he discoursed with the doctors, and the learned doctors at that, and so very well that he put them all to shame. So it was not a very ordinary mind that was acting here, and he said, and he knew the scriptures quite well as knew life and knew God. He pointed out, he says, if Moses called them gods to whom the word of God was spoken, and the scriptures cannot be broken, why do you say that I blaspheme when I say that I am the Son of God? In other words, here's the diminutive of God, the Son of God being a diminutive of God. Now, he said, why are you saying that I'm blaspheming when I'm only saying I'm the Son of God? So this in itself showed clearly that the destiny of all men in reality was to become one with God. And can you think of any higher destiny? I can't. And what a deprivation we would all face if we had to always be subservient to God, but never could come up over that pinnacle of reality that is God, or representing God. Because God, in the sense of man today, is probably a being that has all power and has a crown that contains that power, and nobody can take it away from him. We think in terms of God as a king. But God thinks in terms of givingness of himself to man. His primary desire is to give man all the power that he has. He's just trying through the centuries to figure out how to do it when mankind insist on misunderstanding what they're getting and start trying to derive that power from another source. Now, for example, I have toured all around the world at different times and in different places. And in some shops that we go into just to browse, just to see what we can see, we see as many as 3/4 of the books on witchcraft, black magic, Satanism, Aleister Crowley, and every other dark soul that has ever lived upon the planetary body that has been able to manipulate people and confuse people. And we see all these books on the shelves, and they're not exactly cheap. In many cases, they're even in paperback, all the way from $1.75 in some cases up to $5. And they would not be there if there were not a force behind putting them there. First of all, they are selling because of stimulated interest in our colleges and universities. And we find people engaged in the silly business of uttering words which they know not, as witchcraft words, for example, dark words. They will say these words, and little do they know how carefully, how diligently they are blackening their soul by so doing. Because it is absolutely unnecessary for anyone to do these things in order to gain anything. First of all, I don't think many people in the world actually are successful in gaining anything by this, except a lot of negativity. And if the enemy of man fools them by letting them think that this is some form of reality, it is only a fooling them in a manner that will temporarily give them rewards and then chew them up and spit them out afterward. And the last state of the man or woman will be far worse than the first state. This I know from examining the Akashic records and witnessing how people have done this then too. We witnessed this on Atlantis. We witnessed it in Lemuria. Mankind have unfortunately sought power from God for nefarious purposes of control over their fellow men, and this is the absolute worst thing that people can do. Because there is such a beautiful fellowship of the communion of Christ in the symbolical communion cup. We all drink into one spirit. And there is no reason why we should have people engaged in getting things by the wrong methods when the right methods will provide them so much more and so beautifully dispensed by their Creator. You see, the Creator has always planned for man. He's planned for his creation. Now stop just and think from a logical standpoint. If you were a creator, if you were God, and you were to follow the pattern of what you believe God is, and this is quite important because we get into anthropomorphism here, where some people may have a God made in their image, and I hope that you don't take it in that way, because I don't mean it in that way. I don't mean that you have a different idea of God than someone else, and therefore this is the God I'm talking about. I'm talking about the living God and what the living God would do, which is all righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit. I cannot find in looking out here at the sky when it's blue and beautiful that God did not create it. When I see clouds there, oftentimes these clouds are very beautiful. And I see the hand of God traced in the clouds. Sometimes the superimposition of bad pictures in the clouds are the result of human misconceptions affecting nature, so that people's thoughts also sometimes control certain facets of nature. And when they do, and I have seen this, and I know how to do it myself, and I think quite a few of you know this, but I'm not boasting in this because it's just a statement of fact, because if one man can do it, then another can also. But I certainly wouldn't try to do something like this without first striving to perfect my soul a little bit. You know what I mean? I don't think that's all important. I mean, to control nature. It's far more important to control our human nature and learn how to control our emotions. I think one of the greatest problems that human beings have on the path toward God is the fact that we are all from time to time at sword's points with somebody or some idea. We just don't agree with something, and then we rise up in some form of wrath and try to convince this person that they are wrong and we're right, when in reality a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still, and so why bother? The whole idea is to try to live and let live, but seek God with all your heart and all your mind and all your being, because He is the truth, and that truth will reveal itself to you. And you may repudiate some of your own ideas. After all, I have found it very healthy to keep an open mind, and when I get a divine idea from God, I generally find that that idea, because it's from God, remains fixed in my consciousness forever. But sometimes, like everyone else, I think an idea may come into the mind, to creep into the mind, that is not necessarily correct. And so then I always say, Lord, thy will be done, because I ask Him for the truth above all other things. That is most important to me as a person. I feel that truth is vital. And so I recognize that truth always exists. And if it were possible to take a pill, and after we took that pill we'd know everything that was true, why then it'd be very simple. But sometimes it's a bit of trial and error, and sometimes it's a matter of teaching from one of the great masters. I know that many parts of the universe are completely foreign to me, as to you, I'm sure. Some of you may have more experience than I. I don't dare to say that you don't, because I think it's ridiculous to judge anyone. So I leave that to the Father, and I proceed to try to find what gleanings I can through the power of the Holy Spirit of the mysteries of God. Sometimes in contacting the great masters, they tell me things of far-off worlds that I do not know. And through their experience, I have to have some trust, and there is a mutuality of trust between us. They trust that if they say, don't say anything about this until you get all the facts, then I have to keep still, and that's pretty hard sometimes, you know. When you're a teacher and you're teaching people, and the masters say, now I've given you this, I'm going to give you more, but don't say anything till I give you all of it. then you want to just hop out there on the bandwagon and start telling somebody, well, the master said this, you see. And I have an intimation of it. So you see, we are all tempted, and we all have to stand up and be stalwart, hopefully. And if we fail sometimes, which we try not to do, we better make up our mind that we're going to do better the next time. Because actually, can you really turn back from the spiritual path? That's a question I ask. Of course you can turn back because you can do anything through free will. But can you actually do it and be comfortable about it? I don't think so. I have never been able to get out of the hand of God. It's been just that difficult. Not that I wanted to, but the point is, sometimes it seems as though there is almost an uncomfortable little causeway, and that the big walls of that causeway just simply lead you on the straight and narrow path. Now, no one really wants to, in their right mind, get off of that path, but at the same time, you feel that there just isn't any other way. And in reality, narrow is the gate and straight is the way, is what the Master said. And I think probably the best thing that everybody should do, at least I've tried to do it, is just be comfortable with it, because it's really a highway of safety and beauty. And all the introductions of hardship are tests on the path. We have to recognize that. And I think these are tests that we merit. I can't believe that when you have a credit card in your pocket, and if you go ahead and use that credit card, we'll say in Beirut, Lebanon, we'll say take your Bank America card over there, and they have a Bank America card type of arrangement over there. And they punch this over in Beirut and charge you $50. It comes back here to your bank, and that charge will appear on the statement because you were the one who used that credit card. And I can't believe that if man can actually create such a marvelous system through the power of God, that God has given him the gift of creating these computers, which are so marvelous. I can't believe that if man can do this, that God can't. Therefore, I believe that absolute justice permeates the universe. And I don't believe he sends any charges back to us that we didn't incur, or any credits. And therefore, I'm sure that our reward is certain, as well as any form of chastisement which may be beneficial to us, as we would probably have to do to our own children. Now just suppose that any one of you had a son or a daughter, and the child got to be 12 years old and acted up something terrible at the table when you had company. Or even if you didn't have company, but acted up and started throwing the potatoes all around the table and all sorts of things. And you said to that child, now you stop it. And the child went right on doing it. You show me the person, man or woman in here, that could let that go on and wouldn't, mind you, stop it. Isn't it true? I mean, you have to stop it. You just can't have it go on. And how are you going to stop it then? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Right. I mean, you feel you have to not spare the rod and spoil the child. I mean, you can't just withhold it and say, now don't do that, Johnny. That's not a nice thing that you're doing. I don't exactly agree with what you're doing. Please don't do this when the company's here. And he'll say, well, I just want to do it. You can't have that. And so it's perfectly reasonable to understand that the chastisement that is built into the universe is really a means of teaching, a means of the universe teaching us. And I can't help but believe that in most cases the apostles, the prophets, and the teachers down through the centuries, and the spiritual people and the masters, all these people have probably covered every human subject. I believe that they have covered it all. And I think it would be boring to repeat everything right now and just say, this is what the Master said, thou shalt not, etc. It'd be like the Ten Commandments. You know, after a while people get very bored of hearing the same thing over and over again, especially when they violate them. It's the violators who don't like to hear it. And the people who do it like to hear it because they like to be reinforced in the fact that they're doing the right thing, you know. But the biggest problem for these people is that sometimes they do the right thing that they may be thought well of by others. And they want to be able to say, well, I'm a righteous person and I've never done anything wrong. Actually, all we're doing is putting on the righteousness of God. It's not really our own righteousness. Because when St. Paul said, there is none righteous, no, not one, he meant it. He even told a story about himself. He said, the evil that I would not do, he said, that I do. And the good that I would do, that I do not. So then it is not I that do it, he says, but the evil that dwelleth in me. Well, he certainly acknowledged the indwelling presence of Christ. So we have to recognize that St. Paul and most of the early Christians were also cognizant of the two, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, of the little girl with the curl in the middle of her forehead, you know, that when she was good, she was very, very good. When she was bad, she was very horrid. In other words, we have to recognize the propensities to do good and to do evil, and to recognize that the good stems from the divine in us, and the bad from the human and the carnal and the licentious spirits that no doubt are in the world still, because mankind is so busy feeding them that they keep them alive. So we have to safely conclude a very interesting concept now, which I want to bring to you this morning in this teaching. And this concept involves a chess game that is always going on. I'd like to have you remember this. This is a very important thing. A chess game is going on, and on one side of the chess game, the spirit, there's only one spirit, but the Spirit of God, or God, is sitting there in this chess game. And God is playing, and on the other side is the anti-God, or Antichrist. And this is a reflection from the human level. In other words, man is actually the creator, in a way, of the Luciferian concepts, because he sustains them. So we have God and the devil, and whether you believe in one or not doesn't make any difference. I mean, the kind of devil I'm talking about is the devil that acts on people. Now, you can say he doesn't exist if you want to, but you can hardly deny that there are influences in our society that constantly make the front pages of our newspapers, and if you can tell me that God did it, all right, then I'll say that God is two, that he's good and evil all in one, but he isn't. And so we have to give recognition of the fact that there is someone playing chess with God, and who's the pawn? You and I. We're all pawns. We're pawns on this chessboard, and we're moved around, and God is always trying to move us into victory, into the safety zone, and the enemy's always trying to put us behind the 8 ball. He's trying to finish us. So, I mean, the game is constantly going on, and it's very, very good that we understand that we are pawns until we become sons. You know, in the chess game, you have your bishops and your different figures, you know, that are higher than just the ordinary chessmen. And so we have to recognize that eventually we can go up the cosmic peerage until we become an ascended being when we get clean off the chessboard, of course. That's what the difference of the ascension really is. It means that you're no longer a pawn, you're no longer pushed around, and it's no longer in jeopardy as to whether or not you're going to make it. Quite frankly, I will say that I don't see how you can fail unless you want to. Because God has arranged it so that you will win your victory ultimately. It all becomes a matter of time. There's a lot of people here today in this world that they wouldn't sit here and listen to this lecture for anything in the world. They'd walk out so fast it would make your head spin. Well, that'd be perfectly all right with me, because I'd realize that if they had that kind of a consciousness, that I couldn't reach them anyway, and God couldn't reach them. So what would be the value of even worrying about it? He's crying over spilt milk. Let them go out and spill the milk. You know what I mean? You just have to recognize that where the carcass is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. Now, I want to say that again. Wherever the carcass is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. And that means where the body of Christ is, and where the spiritual meat is, the high-flying eagles of consciousness, those who want to know the truth, will come and be gathered together, because they want to have what is truth. They don't want to be out here in the domain of error. So all we're talking about in this lecture on the furnace of creation is the fact that man as God intended it to be, will, through the process of the cosmic time machine, be able to achieve his perfection through the 7 days of creation, in the furnace of creation, where the great spiritual activity is going on in the furnace that will melt all of the liquid, all of that which was not liquid to start with. It was solid, but now we melt it into liquid, and the gold is in the furnace, and the dross is coming to the top. And as the dross comes to the top, what do people do? Those who manage the furnace, they always skim off the dross, because they are seeking to have a refined 24-karat gold bar, aren't they? They're trying to get real purified gold. They don't want any of the dross in there. No cinders, no debris, no sand. They want nothing but the pure gold metal. And so we have to understand that the furnace of creation is a boiling furnace in more ways than one. If you go into the star systems and you examine through astronomical means the star systems, you will find that there is a white-hot heat in the sun systems. There's a tremendous activity, and actually far-off worlds are being flung off, and new universes are being created. And so we see that this process is continuing, and the universe, like a giant bubble, is expanding, expanding, and expanding and expanding. And some of the scientists say, well, will it one day burst? Well, of course, it isn't a bubble. But like a bubble, it is expanding. And we find that there are movements in the star systems that indicate this. Well, this is the outer furnace of creation. It's too vast to comprehend for most of our minds. We may be able to memorize Cassiopeia and some of the star names that we have arbitrarily given to these stars. We may be able to memorize the various qualifications of these stars, how hot they are, what kind of gases are present, what system do they belong to, Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, and things like that. We may be able to memorize facts that man has assigned. But that is not important, because after you know all of these systems of stars and what they do and the properties thereof, how much better off are you, except that you're a learned person? What does it actually do for you when it comes to the standpoint of necessarily making you happy, although the acquisition of knowledge makes some people happy, and that's perfectly all right. I don't see anything wrong with it. But the point is, there are more right things that can be done by perfecting our worlds in our relationship with our fellow men and with God. So creation is a testing ground, and the furnace of creation sometimes heats up pretty badly. And life sometimes becomes uncomfortable and difficult to bear. But what are we going to do? Stop the world? I want to get off? Are you going to say it's a big merry-go-round? I just don't like it? Because if you do, then nothing is going to happen in the evolutionary process of you. If right today you were taken out of the body, just like that, and put into some astral realm, or even put into some sleeper's realm, where you just slept and didn't know anything, just laid there. You know what I'm talking about, I think. Hope you do. In other words, well, what would happen to you from an evolutionary standpoint? You could be like Rip Van Winkle. 10,000 years could go by, then you could take another embodiment if you wanted to actually go against the cosmic law. And you'd pop back in, and you'd find things were so different now that a lot of people have caught up, and they've moved ahead, and they've graduated. And now an entirely different evolution is upon the planetary body, and you're suddenly thrown into the stream, sink or swim. Do you see what I'm talking about? We're not dealing with life that is dead. We're dealing with life that is alive. This life is God. And if we want to get off, or we want to get out of this evolutionary stream, spiritual or material, it's almost impossible to do. Now, some people say, well, why is this so if God is so just and fair? Well, he is just and fair, and I think that people have the right to commit suicide if they want to, and many do it every year. But what they don't know is that in most cases they are thrown right back in the stream of life on very short order again, and they usually come face to face with the same problems that caused them to want to do it in the first place. So they really just keep getting thrown back and thrown back and thrown back, and each time there's a heavier karma upon them for having made this error. So I can't see any profit whatsoever to the soul of man or to the being of man why he would want to get out of the mainstream of life in this manner. Well, if you can't get out of it then, and you are on a sort of a merry-go-round that's going to keep running and never stop, you might as well learn how to manage that merry-go-round and how to control it and how to get the most out of it. And I think that's what our conferences are all about. We're trying to show people how they can get the most out of life and why they should. And these things are absolutely true. The furnace of creation has a purpose, and it is a testing ground for the mettle of the soul, of our own individuality, in other words, to find out just what we as individuals are made of. And the question is, are we going to go back to our God identity? Are we going to live in our synthetic identity, which we have created out of illusion? We've spun this synthetic identity out of illusion. We say, this is me. But that doesn't stay me, does it? Because me at the age of 10 and me at the age of 20 are two different people. And me at 30 is something different again. And at 40. And so on up the ladder of chronological age. People change, and they change radically in their thinking. And without guidance, this happens more often. But when you have guidance, you are able to tether yourself to a normal reality of God control. You don't have to go to extremes. You are able to settle down to a systematic process of contact with God and the type of life that you want to cut out for yourself that is crystal clear and shining like a diamond before your fellow men. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. That's the beautiful thing. You don't have to seek the glory for yourself, but let your life be exemplary in its silences as well as in its vocality. I mean, if you're going to speak and become vocal and say, I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that, verily you have your reward, because you're seeking to be admired by men without understanding that quality is a diamond, and quality shines. And when quality shines, it speaks for itself. And who is glorified? Not the person, but God that made that person. This is quite interesting if you stop very carefully to consider it. Because everybody likes to think that they make themselves. Well, they do, but they make themselves because God is in them as the actual Christ seed. This is an all-important point. It's the Christ seed that is the salvation of all races and tongues upon this earth. And this is very interesting because whereas the Messiah was promised to Israel, we know that St. Paul, who was certainly a Jewish gentleman with a Roman citizenship, quite a pedigree, and he went out and brought the light to the Gentiles and was an apostle to the Gentiles, which shows that all nations in the spiritual plan of God are intended to come under the dominion of unity with the I Am Presence. You see that clearly, I think. I mean, we may not understand all of its ramifications because it is a great mystery, but at the same time, it is a mystery that we can cognize in part. And as we get a little of this into our consciousness, then we are able to relieve a lot of our anxieties because we know a little bit about who we are. And the more we work with God, the more we are going to have revealed to us. Now, as I draw this furnace of creation to a close, I want to point out that right now, today, the spiritual evolutionary process is going on. It's happening right now. And it happens every day. And the furnace of creation will bring out its 24-karat gold bars in our character, in our lives, in our thoughts, in our sterling worth to the Creator. Because these qualifications exist in God and have always existed in God as potential and as spirit. But when we get above the time-space continuum, when we get above that, we are able then to move backward, as I said, to the point where from the divine standpoint we have created ourselves. But how do we create ourselves? In the image of God. So that the statement, in the image of God created he them, male and female created he them, we are both. And these qualities, when they are perfectly balanced in man and in woman, will give us the nature of God. Our polarities today are deliberately misbalanced in order to attract the opposite sex. If we were neuter, in the sense that we had just half male and half female, we wouldn't be attracted to them at all. But by this imbalance, we have the attraction in order to bring about wholeness, because people feel that they are not complete without the other energies. And it's a great mystery, which I'm not going to go into in depth, because some people might misunderstand it, and it's not intended to be any other way than to be divine and explain to you the divine nature of man. When it's properly understood, however, we see the Christ nature in man, and Christ had that balance. I suspect somewhat that that's why a lot of our modern artists have painted Jesus as a very, well, almost insecure person that was more or less feminine in nature, with very pretty long hair and pretty eyes and just a beautiful sort of a person, without giving him any quality of strength imparted, you know. This has been done a great deal. People have painted him in this manner, when actually others have gone to the other extreme, and they've painted him as a fanatic, standing there with a whip in the temple, and fiery eyes, and a beard that was scraggly, you know, and that he was a radical, you see. You get all kinds of different pictures of the Christ. But in reality, when you do achieve mastery, you have a great deal. I'm going to tell you something about long hair. Now, I'm not standing up here to condemn anybody that's got long hair. It's not my reason. But I'm going to tell you who can wear long hair. Any man or any woman that, of course, a woman can wear it anyway. But yet, I'm telling you who's entitled to wear it. The one that's entitled to wear it, that's in a male body, I mean long hair, is someone who has become a master. Because that is what long hair denotes. It denotes the inner vow of the Nazarite. It has to do with the perfection of God. And those who wear it because they have acknowledged that they have balanced themselves in their masculine and feminine nature. You see, there is no preponderance of the masculine in a man then. He's balanced that part of his nature, and so he wears the long hair to symbolize this balance. Some of the Indian masters have done this. They've come to this country with long hair because they had actually balanced their nature within, you see. When you understand this, then you realize that it's a certain amount of fraud on the part of some of our young people today, and they don't know it, to wear long hair because they haven't balanced it yet. Now, I'm not going to take out specifics. When I see a guy standing in front of me with long hair, to me, this is a symbol of a man who's balanced his whole masculine and feminine nature. So I'll accept it on face value. I'm not going to judge him. But I'm just telling you what it really, from an inner standpoint, what it really means. And the person knows themselves, I hope, whether or not they have balanced their nature. And if they have, I doubt that they'll be pursuing the opposite sex. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
But it happens to be true. So the furnace of creation is a furnace. And the testing aspect of the Master's teachings are very important. So I'm not going to do like some preachers do. That's why I don't stand up here and start telling people, oh boy, this is the greatest thing in the world. It happens to be. But at the same time, I'm not going to promise you liberty and then myself be a servant of corruption. Instead of that, I'm going to tell you that you will have to work. If you have a bad karma, you're going to have to straighten it out. I'll admit that the mercy of God is very great, and I'll admit that it can be done, and we have the systems to do it. But to promise you that if you get on the Lord's caravan, that from now on your life's going to be absolute perfection, I will not do. I will say that in some cases it will be an uphill struggle. In most cases it is an uphill struggle, in fact. I know very few people that don't have an uphill struggle, and that includes the masters before their ascension. They've been climbing the hill of Golgotha and walking the Via Dolorosa, in part, all through their whole existence. But to some extent, I think that basically they've enjoyed it because they realize where they're going. They also know that sometimes the fruits of the carnal nature will bring temporal happiness to people where they'll be going downhill all the time and they're having fun doing it. But wait till they pay the bill. And that's the whole thing in a nutshell. And so I wanted today in this lecture to particularly impress upon you that the creation isn't finished because you are involved in it. And all life is involved in it. And it's a matter of shall God take all of his chosen few, those that actually believe and have qualified to him, into some Valhalla or heaven, and leave the rest of the world burn like Nero, where Nero was fiddling while Rome burned. Shall God do this and play the harps while human beings suffer? No, of course not. God constantly sends his avatars, his teachers, and his people down into human form to try to get the human monad to understand its destiny. Because he knows that if they don't understand it, they're going to wander off in all directions and the sheep will be scattered. And so the drawing together of the sheep into the sheepfold is an activity. He says the fields are white to the harvest. I think all of you know that the average Christian today understands this as simply gathering them in to be church members. Well, being church members isn't going to solve anything. What is going to solve something is a new interpersonal relationship with God and man. We've got to understand where we are and what we are in part. Paul declared, he says, I know in part. But he says, then I shall know even as I am known, you see. So we have to recognize that you don't come to God today on a Friday, the 13th, and decide that today, on Friday the 13th, everything's going to be solved. You come and say, I know that your plan is one of unfoldment and receding veils, that one by one these veils will be pulled away, and I'll understand the purpose of creation, and I'll escape from the furnace, because I will be a refined bar. You know, after you get refined, you don't need to be in the furnace anymore. That's the whole thing, in a nutshell, again. So let us recognize these facts not as somber, but as delightful, because I would rather know the truth, and I think you would too, than to be fooled by somebody saying, now you do this mantra 100 times a day, or 150 times a day, or 3 times a day, and you'll be all right. Oh yes, you can do the same thing if you want to in some cases by just injecting yourself with morphine. You might feel that you are all right. So I'm all right, Jack. You know, I'm all here. I have everything I need, because feelings are very temporal. But let's try to get the kind of truth that is permanent and enduring. And then the purposes of life will be seen as evolutionary and progressive, and we'll be a part of it. And the teachings that we bring forth will help to make it that much easier. Believe me, there are many helps to man, and these are always available to you, if you will only look for them. So thank you, and God bless you.